This is a video for Sympatico, which you can see down here is, this is what it looks like. This is how it relates price action from another ticker overlaid on this one. In this case, I've overlaid ES, which is the S&P 500, right onto Apple, and it tries to normalize. And you see these lines represent the candle body, and the dots represent the wicks of the sympathy ticker. So this is what an adjusted ES was doing on this candle, and you can see that Apple is way below, and so at some point when it's going to try and reach equilibrium, so you know that there's going to be a bigger move back. Not always, but you can just tell how Apple is trading against it, and this is a 1 minute, so on a candle by candle real-time basis you can see how it, whether it's lining up with ES or whether it's diverging, whether there's more selling pressure here on Apple at this point than there is in the market as a whole. So you can sort of discern differences between your sympathies. My friend Deb just pointed out to me as well that you can do an inverse VIX on SPY and then see how it diverges, and then if it I'm not even sure how to trade that stuff because I've never really used VIX as a trading indicator. But apparently it's very good at telling if there are differences in that volatility index to the market as a whole. You can just use that to trade against SPY, which would be pretty cool. I think I'm going to start digging into that more and figuring that out. I think this will be good for that. But what I use it for is for looking at differences between my Apple charts and my ES charts, just so I can sort of see where we are in reference to each other. So with this, you can see the charts don't really match up directly, but the underlying sympathy does. And that's, so I wrote this little study called Darkness that will let you remove your current candles so you can just see the studies. And that's just so that I could sort of see what this looks like. So you can see from this area that the price on the underlying actually went up higher here on the original chart. So it's not a one-to-one comparison. That's not what this is for. And you can't do that anyway because they're all different and they're going to be different. What I wanted to do was show relative differences. So you as you're looking at these candle to candle, yeah, this is not a direct representation of this ES chart, but it does show you in relation to the current candle what's going on there. So if you take off the let's take off darkness. So then you can see here, though, like what that means is that Apple is dragging way down, and the reason that this isn't a one-to-one is because I'm using Apple's VWAP to mark ES against. And the reason is because, I mean, there is a comparison study. Like if you go in and type in comparison, you can compare things, one to another. So here's SPX against Apple, and so when you do that, it's not even here. You can see it's because it's all the way up in the 300s and Apple's at 140. It doesn't do anything to try and put them together, and so it doesn't even show up here. So it's kind of a useless, much less trying to compare something like the ES directly. It's just not going to work. Because again, ES is way up in the thousands, and it's just not going to show up on this chart. And if it does, it's relating to things that are so distant that they just end up becoming lines that are really far apart. When I first started, I actually tried to just percentage-wise pull these lines down and do all kinds of transformations to try and get it to show up, but it never really worked. I mean, I never really got it to match up very well until I started using this relative, until I broke away from the idea that I wanted it to be a one-to-one chart overlay, because what I wanted was, what's the difference? So that's where Sympatico comes in. So this study is actually, I already have it on here. Let's just show the study. I've got it set up against ES here. That's the default. You can change it to whatever you want, though. It's going to be any ticker will work here. the show values is a default that lets you see these little values above and below of the underlying, so or of the sympathy. So as Apple is at whatever 155.80 here at a peak, this recent peak is at 4,004. And that's handy to know if you're paying attention to the numbers, but it's also an option so that you can definitely take them off. The candle cloud is something that I just added that I'm not sure I like, because it tries to draw a cloud in between the lines, and you can't really, it doesn't really work. But who knows? Maybe it'll work for somebody. But I'm gonna turn that off, and I'm gonna turn on the darkness here so we can see better what's going on. So the way this works is it will draw a line for the top and bottom of the candle body and a dot for the wick. So if we look at these one-to-one with their correlation here, like here's a big red candle, right? So this is a big red candle on both of them. So this is our ES 5 minute, and you can see the candle is pretty widespread, and here it's also pretty widespread. So relatively speaking, this candle is represented fairly well. I mean, the wicks and body match pretty well. I mean, you can also see, like with this one, it's a doji candle, so it's like about in the middle, and it's got more wick on top. The one next to it here has a much longer lower wick, and you can see. I mean, it's hard to see on these. But you can see this one does have a longer lower wick. I mean, the candle bodies and wicks match the sympathy pretty well. And so, like, if you can just pay attention to these lines being candle body and the dots being wick, then when you add your candles back in, you can see how they diverge. So if you were to do something like put SPY. So the sympathy on this one is currently ES, and I've just added SPY. So theoretically, they should be one-to-one, and you can see they do line up really, really well. There are very slight differences, and this is where if you were fast enough, you would be able to exploit those differences, because this SPY is always going to try and mirror the actual future that it's tied to. And when it doesn't, people, not people, but computers can exploit those differences, with very small fractions of a move to actually make money off of it. So you can see it's not exact. But if you were to take the ES and overlay with ES, it's going to be perfect. It's not going to, and I also have that ugly comparison line on there that I'm going to have to take out. So you can see here that it's actually one-to-one. I mean, it's lined up exactly all the way, because it's the underlying and this are the same thing. So there is no difference in VWAP. So what VWAP does is it allows us to sort of try to normalize between two different things and plot it on top. So the way I use it in actual trading so far has been to spot the lags between what Apple is doing and what the underlying is doing. So here I don't even need to look at my 5-minute chart and see what it's doing. I mean, I can tell that when there's this big drop, like, the body of this candle actually sort of shows a big drop on the underlying. But we get up here and we see, Apple pushes up above where the price action is. So now Apple has more buying power than the ES does, relatively speaking. So it's diverging here, and this is where the EMA comes in. When I wrote this, I didn't originally intend to expose this. I was just going to make this a variable, but you can change this, and you can change the way this relates. And this is the EMA length is how many candles we use for the VWAP calculation. So for different time frames, you may want to change this, only because on higher time frames, the VWAP difference can be a lot bigger, like a lot more exaggerated, and this can make it a little less exaggerated. So what, like in practical terms, what that looks like, here's a 4-hour chart over here. You can see that Apple has been trading far above the market on a 4-hour chart, relatively speaking, for kind of a long time. And when it doesn't, when it comes back, you can see where it starts matching up again, and then where it diverges again. And I would say this is true. I mean, I've noticed a lot of extra buying pressure on Apple recently it's going up and the market doesn't want to, so the market is trailing behind Apple. And you can use this because, I mean, this is when Apple's bad news came out a couple of days ago, for example, and there's this huge drop. And you can almost predict that once it starts getting back in the range of ES, that's where it's like, this is a correction. And now Apple is trading only slightly above. So all of that buying pressure that was built up here as soon as it got bad news got wiped out back down to a baseline, close to a baseline. It's still, it's still trading pretty much above. Which means, you can kind of, if it starts going below, Apple may be losing that buying power and pushing down for a bigger move down. And again, so the candle bodies are just these lines. So each, it's just, imagine these two lines filled in, and that's your candle body. And imagine these dots having a line connecting them, and that's your wick. And this is all of the underlying is ES. But if you change that EMA here, you'll be able to see how it affects, where's my thing? So if we make this a lot less, like let's say, let's make it ridiculous. Let's make it, five candles. So this is going to be 5 4-hour periods that are going to make up our VWAP, which is going to make the VWAP a lot bouncier. And so when the underlying moves against it, it's if it's got a smoother VWAP, it's going to show up a lot more dramatically here. And so what that ends up meaning is that it like a smaller VWAP tends to normalize more directly, more quickly. So on a higher time frame, this is actually pretty useful because you can see when Apple is trading dramatically against. This would actually be pretty handy because you can see the underlying Apple is a little bit at or below here, and then the next overnight it shoots way up, way out of the range, and it doesn't really come back until this bad news, and then the bad news candle shoots down, and you can tell because it's also a pretty big candle on the sympathy on ES. You know that it's the whole market, and actually I think what happened was Apple dragged the whole market down here. But now they're back sort of at parity. And so this move back up is actually a move in tandem with the underlying sympathy. And this is at, again, 5 candles. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's sort of keeping the sympathy more in track with the current candle. And it's, I think higher time frames, it's handier to do that because you can, you're trying to like get them more or less to overlay so that you can see dramatic local differences. That's the whole point of this, is to see these dramatic local differences. And sometimes what you can do with those, like on this chart, as I'm looking at it, it's going through and it's more or less at parity. It pulls up ahead here, and this tells me that there's going to be a correction because on a local time frame, you don't usually see the kind of larger buying pressure. It's usually, just somebody is trying to get into a position or something, or a lot of people are at once because they see this move, and then it overextends here, and then the underlying you can see has a much bigger candle body and not as long of a tail, and this one has a tail and a lot of buying pressure up, so that this next candle, I'd go into this thinking, well, we're still overextended here, so I'm expecting this to go down more since this didn't actually come up above the high of the previous candle. Third time in a row, I mean, this might be a good place for puts, and sure enough, not only does it drop, but it corrects back below the original underlying ES value, and then it's now it's below, and so from here, this is where I'd be like, if I'm scalping, I sell out. I mean, that's one of the main reasons I wrote this, is so that you can kind of see how to scalp quickly, in between individual candles. I mean, you can do this on any time frame too. If you're a 10-minute trader, here's your 10-minute Apple chart. You can see the exact same things, whether it's above or below the current pricing action, or whether it's on par. And if it's chasing, if it's going off on its own, you can kind of see again here's another correction. It tries to blow through, and it's just too far away from the underlying. And my guess, I don't know, I mean, I'm not a financial person, but my guess is that a lot of people are basing these movements on the market as a whole, for these exact same reasons, because unless there's some sort of Apple news that really pushes Apple out of whack, Apple generally trades, it's big enough that it generally trades pretty close to the S&P. and when it doesn't, then you can use that as an opportunity to try and buy down, or but like get it, like this is basically arbitrage almost. That's not really the same thing, but it acts the same way, where you can take a price difference and exploit that because it's predictable in the short term. And sure enough, I mean, this price wants to equalize, because I suspect, again, not a financial person, but big banks have automatic trading that try to keep them gamma neutral, and I think that's what you see here is that sort of return to the median values. And that's just trying to preserve positions, or leverage. You could even leverage positions against something else. So if you had a pretty large position in ES, and ES was going up but Apple was down, then you'd have a price differential there that you could exploit on a candle by candle basis, if you had a program that you could write to do that. Anyway, this is off getting into the weeds, but you can see that there are these differences in pricing between the sympathy. This would work really well too with something like Mara and RIOT. So if you're on RIOT, trading RIOT, and you want to trade it against the industry leader, so then you'd go in here and change this to Mara. And I mean, I tried Bitcoin with this, and Bitcoin doesn't do a very good job of because I think it's because whatever exchange TOS is using is not all that great. But the important thing is, so here's something that's trading against a sympathy, and you can see that if you're trading a sympathy against Mara on RIOT here, they're at parity more or less, but you can exploit the differences between them, and you can see the differences again, like horizontal lines or the candle body. So this candle body of the underlying Mara is a smaller move, but this one was so far down below where Mara was that it was a corresponding extra push up. So you could, get in there with a higher probability that this is going to move a lot further. This candle, these two looked more or less the same, but the underlying low was a lot lower. But their bodies were similar. The wicks were similar in where they were laid out. And this one has a bigger underlying candle body, but the upper wick was exactly the same. So this doesn't really tell you a whole lot, but once it starts popping above, you can start seeing how this is getting oversold against it. And so you can often run into points where your move isn't enough, where you see that this has dropped a lot further, so you might want to stay in longer and let it ride, so don't get out here, because that the underlying, like Mara, has dropped a lot. So chances are this RIOT will also sort of wait. And you can do this with anything. I mean, I one of the other cool things that Deb had said was putting SPY up against the inverse, which I think is SVXY. I mean, again, I don't trade this, but it's something that would be kind of cool to see what the differences are. SVXY, yeah. So if you go, and this is what happens when you're trying to see something that has nothing to do with anything. So this is RIOT or SPY against Mara, which they're not correlated at all. So this is all over the place. This is junk. This is garbage. It tells you nothing. And this is because the underlying and the sympathy have to have some correlation to begin with, or obviously if there's no correlation, then it doesn't matter. I mean, you're not gonna see anything on the chart here. But if we turn this to SVXY, which is our inverse VIX, then theoretically this should tell us things about how if you were somebody other than me, you could read this and say, oh my God, the volatility here is so much greater, it's going to drop, and then it drops, or something. I mean, I feel like with this, this is getting out of my depth. I'm more comfortable seeing things like Tesla and then overlay it with like NQ or something. That to me is going to be, or I guess that's what the volatility doesn't. This is going to roughly track ES anyway, so it's probably close. But I want this underlying here to be like NQ, and then we'll see what Tesla does against that. So in the short term, you can see that Tesla's trading really heavily above it, which makes sense because I mean Tesla is super volatile, and once it gets that far above it, then you may be able to predict. I don't play Tesla, so I don't know how it moves, but you may be able to predict that it's overextended and then have it drop back to parity and even below because it's oscillating, and it's going to oscillate at a much bigger rate because the volatility of Tesla is so high compared to everything else. And you can even compare multiple things here too. The neat thing about this is you can go get another one, and if you want to see what this looks like trading against NQ and ES, so ES is the default again, so NQ and ES, then you can drop this in here, and now you've got two versions of it. You may want to go in and change the colors though. This is something where if you go into globals here, you can change these to something else. So I would just change them to something that's more obviously different. So I would go into like RGB and make this just really red, and then that really green, so that now we can actually see the difference. So you can see here it's also the local difference between NQ and ES. So I forget which one this one was. This is our ES. So ES is trading up higher above NQ in here. And again, like the red and green match the color of the underlying candle. So in ES, this was a doji. But we have a red candle here, and dojis are neutral colored. But all of these candles are red. So when you start seeing things where there are differences here, where like this candle is green, but both NQ and ES have red candles here, which should tell you something. I mean, these are actually like pushing down, and the body of this candle is smaller than other ones, but this could tell you that price action is slowing down, and as they start reaching parity, then you can expect a turn. Because they're all trying to keep together. So, and again, I tend to trade Apple exclusively if I'm not trading SPY. So the nice thing about this, though, is that, of course, I do that all the time, end up looking for Apple Petroleum and wondering where my chart is. But it is kind of cool to be able to overlay more than one underlying onto more than one sympathy onto your underlying, because this will definitely, the color differences aren't big enough here, but you can make them whatever colors you want to be able to tell the difference, because you can see this candle here has a high upper wick and a much lower body. So the candle size more or less matches what's here. It's just so far below that I would expect Apple to start dropping in price from here. Just because on a local scale it wants to try to reach this equilibrium, and part of that is because of the way that it's calculated using this VWAP as a relative scale, so that it's distorting the sympathy candles to show, like to focus on the last couple of candles worth of travel and how different that is from where it's going. So hopefully that clears up how it works. I would love to hear how other people could use this though, because when you have things like running sympathies against other things, there's a lot of stuff that I just don't know about how this works. So I mean, this is part of why I like releasing these out into the world here, is that I would like to hear about how other people are using them. So drop me a note if you've got some innovative use for it that I haven't seen here, and hope it gets you green. Thanks.